We're diving into the 10 most broken items in competitive Pokemon. Though real trainers know that you don't get to be a champion of the Pokemon League without knowing how to spam full restores, in the competitive scene, it's just held items. Also, we're not counting any form changers or generational mechanic items, so no Megas, no Z Crystals, or Booster Energy. If it's so special that it makes you immune to knockoff or trick, like Giratina Origin's Griseous Orb, it doesn't count. So without further ado, we're jumping right in with the Orb of Life, the Life Orb. But only sometimes. It's by far the least broken item on this list, as its impressive 30% power boost is offset by a 10% recoil that is so easily exploitable that simply switching around resistant attacks becomes a viable form of counterplay in and of itself. Forget having to pivot in something that could actually check the Life Orb attacker, simply make it attack enough times and it'll wear itself down. All those boosted moves become less impressive when you realize it makes every one of your attacking options, including Rapid Spin on Starmie, incur recoil as it were Flare Blitz or something. Strong as it is, it's quite limiting to have on one attacking move, let alone all of them. It's why several attackers like Infernape, which was once the definition of a Life Orb attacker, began shifting away from the item over time, as teams had gotten used to the fact that it would eventually KO itself. Loss of power was unfortunate, but once they could no longer count on these opposing threats doing much of the damage dealing for them, many teams crumpled. Turned out the best Life Orb was simply the threat of it, or was it? Well, if that was the whole story, Life wouldn't even be on this list. However, in conjunction with certain abilities, Life Orb wasn't just a worthwhile option, but the best option. When used by a Pokemon with Magic Guard or Sheer Force, Life Orb was elevated to nosebleed heights, one of the most perfect offensive weapons in the game, because such Pokemon got to wield Life Orb's power without the recoil. Fittingly, such Pokemon tended to rank among the most ferocious threats in the game, reaping the massive upside of boosted power while retaining the ability to switch between moves with none of the downside. Magic Guard provided an immunity to all non-direct damage extended to Life Orb's recoil, and for that matter, it extended to recoil from damaging moves as well, meaning that Gen 4 Clefable could wield Life Orb Double Edge, a combo which would normally incur self-damage at a rate that make Infernape seem like a paragon of longevity, and yet Clefable wouldn't take a single hit point of damage itself. In fairness, such a Clefable set was reserved for Gen 4 UU. In OU, Clefable was usually the wall, not the wall breaker. Except once it became a fairy type and gained stat Moonblast, it wasn't only able to use Life Orb on a defensive set, which is otherwise about unheard of, but it was also able to run sets with all-out offensive investment and become an amazing wall breaker in standard play as well. This wasn't just through raw power, but how Magic Guard also fixed the usual Life Orb problem of getting worn down not just by the 10% per hit, but by other residual damage as well. Being unbothered by all of that gave even more opportunity to unleash those freely boosted attacks on the opponent. Reuniclus was equally apt as a Life Orb user on offensive attackers and defensive Calm Minders alike, but the most fearsome of them all was Alakazam, which lacked the bulk but more than made up for it with incredible special attack and speed. Then there was Sheer Force, which was basically a built-in Life Orb, power-wise, except its trade-off was only boosting moves with secondary effects which could no longer be triggered, and seeing how most special attackers from Flamethrower to Thunderbolt to Ice Beam had secondary effects, this was a lot of them. So take this level of built-in Life Orb power and then actually toss the Life Orb on it and forget the Life Orb recoil, because Sheer Force boosted moves wouldn't incur Life Orb recoil. The ludicrous power of the recoil-free effective double Life Orb launched Landorus Incarnate into Uber territory, utterly destroying OU generation after generation, and made Nidoking a massive threat as well. Yes, Nidoking, with its base 85 special attack, was a wall breaker easily capable of devastating OU defenses. Life Orb without the recoil? Utter terror. Now speaking of recoil-free power, next up is greater responsibility but greater power in the form of choice items, but mostly banned and specs. But before we get into the choice items, this video is sponsored by Marnie, a top 5 language learning app with over 125 million downloads worldwide. Black Friday is upon us and Marnie has an enormous exclusive limited time offer. Marnie is offering 70% off lifetime access. And that's a steal because Marnie offers language lessons in over 1,320 language combinations. Marnie offers 41 foreign languages to learn from 33 native languages. For example, my native tongue is English, but I've always wanted to learn Japanese because, well, I mean, it's obvious I love Japanese media. So I just inputted that and I can quickly start several American English to Japanese courses. Marnie is designed in a way to make your language speaking proficient through daily use. To do so, it has daily lessons where I can build my proficiency in Japanese by taking a 10-minute lesson each day. There's even a point system and a leaderboard to see how I'm doing relative to other students on here. And looks like I have a long way to go. And the best part about it is that a lot of the content on here is practical and focused for very specific conversations that you would probably find yourself in. Every lesson and audio material are recorded with fluent speakers to ensure their authenticity. All of this and more when you download Marnie. So if you want to practically steal all this content and also support the channel to help us produce more content, click our link in the description below to take advantage of Marnie's Black Friday sale. Get 70% off lifetime access to all languages. Maybe Choice Band was initially well balanced in advance, as most physical moves had lower base power, while the ones with the higher power had rare distribution, plenty of solid resists, and risk factor. And of course, the type base system meant Pokemon like Gyarados had hidden power flying as their strongest physical stat. You generally had to work to get something out of these reliably. Then Gen 4 came along, and the physical special split let every Pokemon unleash stab from their preferred attacking stat, while also piling on the high base power moves left and right. And not just on the physical side. Before you could say Specs Draco one-hit KO, the special side also got in on the action, making the game far more immediate than the preceding generations. Suddenly, a new genre of attacker became commonplace, the choice attacker, that was dangerously close to forcing a KO every time it switched in because it was so powerful you simply could not stave it off, even with resists. Close combats, outrages, Draco Meteors, overheats, Hydro Pumps, in the rain especially, were suddenly dropping just about anything you could throw at them. One-hit KOs and two-hit KOs abound, VGC and singles alike, against targets with perfectly solid natural bulk. You needed either full health resists, max out in bulk, or outright immunities to withstand most of these. Beyond raw power, there was plenty of utility to be found as well. U-turn, pursuit, knockoff, scald, priority moves like bullet punch and ice shard, and with switch moves being added to the game as well, it was easier than ever before to get one of these big hitters on the field, no matter how frail and slow it was. Against a slower target, it threatened to vaporize. Choice Band Crawdont, at a truly paltry base 55 speed, was one of the most feared wall breakers in ORAS, despite packing nearly zero capability of switching in by itself. But it was nothing a standard Volt Turn team couldn't support when the results were such instantaneous deletion of just about anything you could try to respond with. The third of the choice items, Scarf, wasn't really broken. If anything, the boosted speed served as a critical option for keeping many power crept new threats in check. See the multiple generations where Scarf Tyranitar basically held the metagame together. Sometimes quote-unquote random Scarfers would upset speed tiers and contribute to a sense of volatility. In the first 3 gens, there was a security in knowing that certain Pokemon had no shot of outspeeding your Gengar or Starmie. But relative to the havoc that Band and Specs were wreaking, Scarf was pretty tame, most of the time anyway, not counting monsters like Genesect and Kyogre. At least with Scarf, you had more options to outspeed those Band and Specs users. Now let's move beyond doing damage and into the realm of withstanding with Focus Sash. Stealth Rock is mandatory on every singles team, because it's just too good not to use, right? Well, yes, but it first started being used because Focus Sash was being spammed everywhere, not just on leads, the way we're familiar with, but on multiple Pokemon per team, even on sweepers like Swords Dance Lucario, and players consistently feared it. In fact, whenever discussions on potentially banning the undeniably broken Stealth Rock came up, one of the primary counter-arguments was always, we can't ban Stealth Rock because then Focus Sash would be too easy to spam. Whether or not this would be true is besides the point, and even with Stealth Rock in the picture, Focus Sash's guaranteed survival of any single hit from full health has been one of the most extraordinary tools in both singles and VGC since its addition in Generation 4. We take it for granted now, far removed from those initial Sash panic days as we are, but it really is an incredible item because for one turn, a Sash Pokemon not being threatened by an opposing KO upends one of the most basic dynamics in Pokemon. Focus Sash's presence is as sprawling as it is impactful, whether for direct offense or team support. Shadow Rider Calyrex can wield it to repeatedly unleash Astral Barrage in VGC, just as Aerodactyl wields it to set up Stealth Rock in singles. In conjunction with Magic Guard, Sash Alakazam became arguably Gen 5 OU's most defining threat, but able to act as a one-time check to just about everything while enhancing its own formidable offensive threat. Sash allows even frailer Pokemon like Fluttermane to throw around their terrifying powerful attacks without having to walk on eggshells in the chaotic crossfire of VGC's 2v2 format. When Sturdy was buffed in Generation 5, everyone got excited because it was now an equivalent to Focus Sash, and in spite of hazards or Sandstorm or priority to finish the Sash user off before they can move again, simply the option to have something like Breloom lead off against something like Latios and not have to switch out is absolutely incredible. Sash was an item prized for its enabling of immediate playstyles, but what if you were going for a more drawn out approach? Why, then you'd go with Leftovers. No surprise here. Snorlax's Gen 2 signature is fittingly the competitive item. In fact, you can argue it was the first competitive item, as when held items were introduced in Gen 2, there weren't many options, so the majority of teams indeed had 6 Pokemon with Leftovers. It's an item item you can just about never go wrong with. It's hard to argue with freely getting health back, and of course, is a major part of why so many walls are so difficult to break through. In fact, Leftovers is so good, Pokemon like Swampert and Heatran have famously been some of the most ridiculously difficult to KO walls in the game, despite their only source of recovery being the Leftovers Protect combination. Such seemingly minuscule increments add up and make them just as infuriating to break through as a roost spamming Skarmory, which also wielded Protect and Lefties to impervious ends in Gen 3 before it gained Roost. Funnily enough, Lefties isn't just an item to be used when there's nothing better available, or for bulky Pokemon only. Even with plenty of other options, Lefties winds up being an excellent source of several offensive Pokemon because its reinforcement of longevity actually winds up enabling the full potential of the offensive power. Something like 3-attack offensive Combine Jirachi doesn't need Leftovers. It's supposed to be fast-paced, not exactly sticking around for a long time, and it's not even affected by Sandstorm, so it's not getting worn down, letting it thus run Lundberry, or another set of items that we'll see later on in this video. Though not explicitly doing anything for it, Lefties subtly contributes to why it can be so difficult to take down. Something as simple as healing off Stealth Rock damage and keeping it at full health so it can survive a Flygon Earthquake. Okay, but Jirachi's naturally bulky. So are many other excellent users of Leftovers, even on their most offensive sets. Agility Metagross, just about every Dragon Dancer, Quiver Dance Volcarona, certain offensive variants of Heatran and Keldeo, but these are all Pokemon that can take a hit quite decently. Even Keldeo, which you wouldn't think of as such, is actually as bulky as the max HP Starmie that was a go-to defensive choice for many generations. However, Leftovers is so excellent, even frail Pokemon reap their benefits. Remember in the Life Orb section, when we mentioned Infernape eventually moved away from what was originally its signature item? Well, one of the items it moved to was Leftovers. Despite having no bulk whatsoever, Lefties helped make it massively threatening, canceling out Sandstorm damage, or if Sandstorm wasn't in play, helping it shrug off Stealth Rock, letting it switch in more, or even spam U-turn more freely. Meanwhile, in Gen 8 OU, where there's no permanent sand, Blaziken loves running Leftovers to offset Flare Blitz recoil, which works especially well since it also runs Protect to grab more speed boost. In the same tier, Swords Dance, Garchomp, and Rillaboom most commonly run Leftovers as well. Quick shout out to Black Sludge, which was the same as Leftovers for poison types, but meant that opponents had to really watch out before they decided to trick when there was a Roserade, Gengar, Tentacruel, or Toxapex on the other team, lest their non-poison types start losing health. Now, it must be said, in recent times, Leftovers is less of an automatic addition to offensive and defensive Pokemon alike, as it must now compete with heavy-duty boots, a controversial item which many wanted banned for how it circumvented the hazard-centric conception of competitive singles normalized for generations. Heavy-duty boots, in a strange way, illustrates the brokenness of hazards by demonstrating how good many Pokemon can be when unencumbered by them. Sometimes this can be a bit much on Pokemon that will otherwise be kept in check by rocks, Gen 9 Volcarona or Gen 8 Cinderace, but by and large, boots are a survival tool that bring about an almost Gen 1-esque freedom in switching, the foundations of competitive Pokemon, in a game whose hazards had punished the concept for so long, and they became especially necessary to keep up in Gen 9. What with its enormous distribution of spikes to literally every ground type, as well as Hisuian Samurai's Spike Lane Ceaseless Edge, as well as hazard removal being more difficult than ever thanks to the newfound defog blocker Goldango, which also doubled as a rapid spin blocker. Boots are so good, in many cases, they've gone where Leftovers would have been in previous generations. Far from just being a way for Stealth Rock weak Pokemon to get around their greatest flaw, they can be wielded by just about everything so that when they hit the field, they're coming in at full health. Switching into the hugely powerful attacks being tossed around nowadays is difficult enough without starting off at sub 100% thanks to the hazard-littered field. Even Great Tusk, a Pokemon which is more hazard resilient than most, with its quadruple resistance to Stealth Rock, still sometimes runs boots because being able to ignore spikes is just so valuable, especially when it's being tasked with rapid spin. Not being affected by toxic spikes is superb as well, but the really helpful part is that there's no longer the same type of pressure to pull off the rapid spin when other Pokemon on your team can hold boots as well. A quad resist to rocks in previous gen would be a standout for how it allowed the Pokemon to actually out-heal Stealth Rock with Leftovers, which was incredibly rare, but it makes you wonder if Lefties would be as automatic in addition to so many Pokemon if they had boots to contend with across all those generations ruined by hazards. Then again, Volcarona probably would have gotten banned a lot sooner. And speaking of military-styled items that allow one to switch in more easily, next we've got Assault Vest. An amazing buff to offensive Pokemon like Azumarill that just needs some help hitting the field, Assault Vest enables offense, both in hitting the field and being more difficult to revenge kill, and allows these Pokemon to actually contribute defensively. To stick with the Azumarill example, it's not lacking at all in instant power, and its typing provides some neat resistances, but it's with Assault Vest's special defense boost that it can can actually switch into something like a Specs Keldeo Hydro Pump rather well, while even be able to survive powerful counterattacks like Mega Charizard Y Solar Beam and Superior's Leaf Storm. Funnily enough, Superior itself is a fine user of Assault Vest. Assault Vest's immediacy is excellent, basically giving its users a Tyranitar and Sand-esque ability to switch in against all manner of special attacks, and this immediacy is why the limitation to just attacking moves works just fine, especially since there's so much utility to so many of them. In addition to the usual suspects like U-Turn and Knockoff, something like Slowking can use Dragon Tail for phasing, while there are several solid Assault Vest wielding Rapid Spinners, meaning it's not just an item for Pokemon that do nothing but pump out brute damage, though it can work just fine as well. There's so much support that can be gleaned even from the restriction of only attacking moves. See Assault Vest Tyranitar in Gen 7 pursuing any special attacker with absurd ease, or Tank Growth in Gen 7 in spite of its low special defense stat, doing things like preventing Ash Greninja from evolving, or the aforementioned Slowking and its Galarian variant in Gen 8 and 9, with the latter gen also featuring the Assault Vest spike stacking Hisuian Samurai and its Ceaseless Edge. In fact, the most defining Assault Vest user for a long time was Gen 6 Tornadus Therian, a behemoth of utility which, like the Slowkings, was able to repeatedly wield its boosted special defense stat thanks to the built-in recovery of Regenerator. Here's how good Assault Vest was. Tornadus Therian wasn't the only regenerating U-turning knockoff spamming Assault Vest user out there. If you look to Yu in Gen 6 and 7, you'd see Assault Vest Meanshao of all things. Meanshao not a bulky Pokemon by any means. Assault Vest Tangrowth is one thing, given that it's got an amazing HP stat and a poor special defense stat, so with the AV special defense boost it takes hits quite well. However, Meanshao has a poor HP stat and a poor special defense stat. Not quite as poor as Tangrowth, but not good. Plus, Meanshao is supposed to be a fast Pokemon. It doesn't have the luxury of just maxing out HP and special defense. It can't even afford the special defense boosting nature, wants to actually make the most out of its very good speed. And yet, Assault Vest Meanshao completely took over 2 generations of Yu. This thing was switching into Hydreigon's Draco Meteors. It could take 2 from full health, but forget taking 2, it could just switch out and regenerate some more health for itself, having staved off the threat now that Hydreigon was at -2 special attack. If it could take this, it could take anything, and Meanshao repeatedly demonstrated the power of Assault Vest, allowing for defensive and offensive play to go hand in hand. It pivots into an attack, spams U-turn, and knockoff against the opponent, and it's still got a Whopper Stab high jump kit to threaten powerful direct damage. Now, speaking of playing offense while on defense, the next choice does this even more directly with Rocky Helmet. In a way, Rocky Helmet inverted the Assault Vest premise. Your defensive switch wouldn't take less damage, but should the opponent's move make contact, as most physical moves do, as well as Grass Knot on the special side, it would do damage back to the opponent. You can't withstand that big hit, but they're not getting away unscathed. Meanwhile, hits that didn't do much damage can wind up being more disadvantageous for their user than the Pokemon they dared to hit. This was beautifully punishing for one of the most annoying moves in the game, U-turn, and generally helped play around a massive slew of dangerous physical attacks like close combat. It could even help block Rapid Spin, since if the spinning Pokemon was KO'd by helmet damage, the hazard clearing effect wouldn't go off. This was especially effective in conjunction with the contact punishing ability, namely Ferrothorn's Iron Barbs and Garchomp's Rough Skin, which combined to deal incredible amounts of damage to the users of some of the most common useful attacks in the game. In VGC, this was especially useful to dissuade Mega Kangaskhan, which would be especially punished for making contact twice, so much so it'd be 2-hit KO if it did so twice, which in singles, Tank Chop, as the physically defensive Rocky Helmet Garchomp set was known, was incredibly splashable on a team for this defensive offensive utility against something like Mega Metagross's Meteor Mash. Rocky Helmet was a defining aspect of many Pokemon's roles. When Tank Chop first appeared in Black and White 2, it was a big help in dissuading the Volt Turn cores that had dominated Black and White 1, and its ability to punish U-turns from Jirachi and Scizor helped wear them down for the Magic Guard Psychics that would come to dominate the metagame. The hazards which they loved abusing also difficult to rapid spin when Chomp was around. Not that you needed Iron Barbs or Rough Skin to make Rocky Helmet excellent, of course, as Skarmory and Landorus Therian regularly demonstrated. It wasn't just traditional physical walls like this either. As the effect was useful, you could slap it on just about anything to great effect. Tornadus Therian became especially renowned for it, while in Gen 9 we see Goldango and Great Tusk Rocket effectively, but even offensive Pokemon that weren't exactly hit takers were great Rocky Helmet candidates as well. See Superior, in addition to being so useful, with so many contact moves out there, it was just so likely that it would do at least something that made it such a great choice. Even if it gets knockoff, it leaves the knockoff user with a little sting for its trouble. Rocky Helmet was so good, when protective pads came out in Gen 9, Kartana and Urshifu Rapid Strike loved using it, becoming so much more threatening when they couldn't be played around with contact-inducing chip damage. Now, as great as it is to punish the opponent for KOs, sometimes it's better to take that KO away from them entirely. We've seen it with Sash, we've seen it with Assault Vest, but the concept is perhaps at its most potent with Resist Berries. Unlike Sash, you don't have to be at full health. Unlike Assault Vest, you're not forced to only use attacking moves. With Resist Berries, you weaken any one super effective hit, often to game-breaking effect, especially because of how customizable they are. While the opponent might suspect you have a resist berry, they might not necessarily know which one. In its debut generation, Heatran ran all of the ground-weakening Shuka Berry, the water-weakening Pasho Berry, and the fighting-weakening Chopo Berry to superb effect. And just because Chopo was the least common didn't mean that occasionally your close combat would fail to KO and your Lucario would be the one to drop instead. It was incredibly difficult to figure out which one it would be, even based off of team composition. Then there were the resist berries that were much less difficult to expect. Garchomp was famous for the ice-weakening Yacht Berry, but sometimes it would throw on the fairy-weakening Rosalie Berry and crush the Mega Diancie thinking it had a free move. The player base often thanked their lucky stars that resist berries weren't introduced a generation earlier, as the prospect of dealing with a Shuka Berry Dragon Dance Tyranitar, or any Tyranitar really, was utterly dangerous. Goodbye Dugtrio Revenge Kill, as just one ruinous example on one Pokemon. Tyranitar was indeed a great resist berry user. In Gen 5, it shrugged off Focus Blast with Chopo left and right, while in Gen 4, it was so good with Pasho Berry that for a long time it was many teams' arguably the metagame's defining answer to water types. Yes, that's right, Tyranitar was the water answer, taking on Starmie and Polio and Kingdra. It was ridiculous. For a more modern example, look at Galarian Slowking, which in Gen 8 can pick between a Colbur Berry to stay in against Weavile and Tyranitar, and a Shuka Berry to stay in against Excadrill, Garchomp, and Landorus. To be able to flip such major dynamics with such a crucial Pokemon is incredible, especially as it can be tweaked to address whatever issue its particular team needed. Whatever the specificities, resist berries are so extraordinary because their effect is so enormous, and their user can tailor them to their precise needs, regardless of the metagame. They tended to make good Pokemon even better, and with incredible freedom, not imposing any restrictions upon their user, other than to remain healthy enough to survive the hit even with the berry anyway. And we're not done with berries yet either, as next up we have the Pinch Heal Berries. The Pinch Heal Berries are one of the two sets of items on this list that were so good, Game Freak actually nerfed them the generation after they were introduced, or in this case, the generation after they were buffed. The Pinch Heal Berries have been around since Gen 3, but only restored a paltry 12.5% of its user's health when at 25% or less. In Gen 7, the Pinch Heal Berries like Iapop Berry and Figgy would restore 50% of its user's health in this situation. Having a recover that automatically kicked in for you at low health was incredible, and the berries were accordingly all over VGC, while hardly in short supply in singles. Going from 25%, which is on the brink of being KO'd, to 75% is a massive difference, and even if the berries kicked in below 25%, it's still an ocean of difference between the would-be threshold and what you're able to bounce back up to, letting you take what is often several more hits. Getting this sort of second life is already pretty amazing, full stop, but what really bolsters it is how it can be applied as a healing move for Pokemon that don't have one. Who else to embody this concept but Incineroar, Prince of VGC, which has no non-rest healing moves. Yet without even having to take a turn to use recovery, it gets reinforced to be able to withstand more hits. This is especially incredible, operating on a similar principle to why Regenerator, since it means it doesn't have to slow down its barrage of offense and support in order to watch out for its own health at all. But even Regenerator at least requires you to take a turn to switch out. The Pinch Berries were all over VGC, and the fact that there were so many different kinds meant it was a cinch to stack up on them without breaking item claws. In addition to the aforementioned, there were Wiki Berry, Agua Berry, and Mago Berry, healing everything from Tapu Fini to most dangerously Belly Drum Snorlax. So in Gen 8, the pinch healing berries were nerfed to only restore 33% health when they kicked in. Certainly not bad, still perfectly usable, but no longer as outright insane and dominant as the free recover they had been previously. Now we're finishing things off with items that were more than just nerfed, with gems. When the gems were first introduced in Generation 5, they were translating from the Japanese as jewels, and while interesting, they were generally overlooked. A 50% power boost is huge, yes, but a one-time use for something that might not hit its intended target, gems were thus relegated to the niche side, at least in singles. In VGC, the short turn durations meant they were recognized instantly for their ability to tear the game up with massive power, and just as importantly, great flexibility, especially on spread moves. Ground Gem Earthquakes and Fire Gem Heat Waves, the latter under Sun, were terrors. In singles, though for a long time the only common gem user was Flying Gem Acrobatics Gliscor, which didn't mind potentially hitting the wrong target because once it lost its gem, its acrobatics would gain full power. Though it too tries to hold back the initial attack if it could help it, as it was a good deal stronger when bolstered by the gem. It turned out that, if used well, the first acro hit would leave such damage in its wake that it wouldn't matter if the others weren't quite as powerful. The gem hit broke things open, and the subsequent hits cleaned up. This principle is what led gems to be explored further, most notably with boosting monsters like Dragon Gem Garchomp and Dragonite that smashed through everything with their outrage after a Swords Swords or Dragon Dance. Eventually though, Hyper Offense teams spamming multiple sweepers realized two key elements. Number one, gems had often been compared to Gen 7's powered up Z moves for their explosive defensive core shredding burst power effect, but unlike Z crystals, you could use multiple gems on a team. Suddenly these teams had half their users capable of crushing would-be checks through sheer power alone. And as if Volcarona's bug gem bug buzz wasn't bad enough, there was also great variety to pick from. As one example, Volcarona itself could just as well Psychic Gem Psychic its way through Pokemon like Terrakion and Tentacruel. A second realization was that when it came to multi-hit moves like Breloom's Bullet Seed, gems didn't just power up the first hit, but in fact every hit, and such power was utterly absurd. Grass Gem made Breloom's Technician Bullet Seeds really shred, but the most overtly powerful Shell Smash Cloyster and its guaranteed 5 hits of Icicle Spears thanks to its skill link ability. As if that utterly ridiculous power wasn't enough, it could also wield Rock Gem boosted Rock Blast to crush would-be checks like Rotom Wash and Heatran. Gem spamming Hyper Offense teams overtook the metagame, with literally nothing being able to withstand their power, and eventually, gems were banned from Gen 5 OU. They are the only such items to receive this distinction, which is one reason they come in number 1. The other reason is that Game Freak didn't just nerf the gems in Gen 6, though they did, bringing the 50% power boost down to 30%, but they literally took the gems out of the game. They didn't delete them from the code or anything, but in Gen 6, you literally cannot obtain Fire Gem, Water Gem, or any of the other gems that isn't normal. The only one that survived, but it's not worth using anyway. The gems are so strong, they were literally banned from singles and dominated VGC to the extent that Game Freak saw fit to both nerf them and make them impossible to obtain. You know, just in case. You don't get more broken than that. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zathor for their major support of our videos.